Okay, so just when you think you've got a handle on the situation, things seem to take a sharp turn. And this week, it feels like there's well, a distinctly firmer tone coming out of the UK government about Israel and Gaza. Seems like recent events really sparked something.
Exactly. It does feel like a bit of a turning point, doesn't it? And it seems largely driven by Prime Minister Netanyahu's latest announcements, specifically about expanding military operations in Gaza.
Right.
Year, 100,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on Gaza, the equivalent of 5 times of the power of the nuclear weapons used over Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80 years ago. That's resulted in the death of at least 60,000 people. And on top of that, we're now going to have the complete invasion of Gaza by Israel. At what point will the government actually cease all arms supplies and military cooperation with Israel, cease the use of RAF Akrotiri, and above all, stop the export of any parts for F-35 jets, which have been complicit in the killing of 60,000.
Up to now, the excuse has been that we've got to wait until negotiations are complete. There are no negotiations. All that we have is extremist settlers trying to force out Palestinian people from their villages in the West Bank, which I've seen with my own eyes. In the name of God, why can't we give the Palestinian people some hope?
So maybe he can be the one who surprises me, gets to his feet and says that the plan as laid out by Benjamin Netanyahu is tantamount to ethnic cleansing. Will he do that, yes or no?
We now learn from a government minister, an Israeli government minister, that Gaza is to be entirely destroyed. And we're watching the live streaming starvation of an entire people. Now, the minister talks about his anguish, and I know it's genuine, but can he not see what the majority of the House can see, that he's facing a catastrophic failure of government policy?
So for this deep dive, we're going straight to the source of transcript from a recent UK parliamentary debate. Our mission here is to, cut through the noise a bit, understand the real concerns, the arguments flying back and forth, and what actions the UK government and Parliament might actually be considering now. We want clarity for you, not just a flood of information. Okay, so let's dig in. What exactly did Israel announce that's caused this shift in the UK's position?
I agree with the Minister's comments and condemnation of Israel's actions in Gaza. The problem is that I've agreed with him every time he's made these commendations of Israel, and the whole House generally has joined him in that. The reality is that Israel's taken absolutely no notice of the government's position on this. What we're seeing now with the actions in Gaza, the starving of the population, the threats to wholesale moving of that population away are completely unacceptable. So will the Minister consider 2 things now? First of all, a rapid recognition of a Palestinian state, hopefully together with France and other allies. And secondly, to seriously consider sanctions against Israel if they pursue the wholesale removal of Palestinians from their homes.
Well, the main thing seems to be Netanyahu declaring that the Israeli Security Cabinet gave the green light for a pretty significant expansion and intensification of their military operations inside Gaza.
Okay, expansion and intensification.
Yeah, and crucially, this isn't being framed as just more of the same, like short raids. The signals are that Israel plans to actually establish and hold ground for a longer period, holding territory, not just quick in-and-out operations.
Holding ground. That immediately makes you think of occupation, doesn't it?
It does, and that's precisely one of the big worries being voiced. There are reports suggesting these plans could actually lead to a full military occupation of the Gaza Strip.
Wow.
And adding to that anxiety, Netanyahu talked about a plan to move Gaza's population, quoting here, for its protection. Plus, there's been a call-up of tens of thousands of reservists.
Move the population for its protection. Yeah, that phrase definitely raises some serious red flags.
It certainly does. And one more thing, they approved a plan to channel aid using private companies. That's also causing quite a bit of concern.
Private companies for aid. Okay. This is where it gets really critical and honestly a bit worrying. So how did the UK government officially react to all of this?
The official response, which came from Minister Hamish Fuller, was, well, it was pretty strong. He stated very clearly that the UK is strongly opposed to broadening the military operations, and he flatly rejected any attempt to annex Gazan land or change the demographics in Palestinian areas.
Okay, strong words. Opposition, rejection.
Yeah.
But did they talk about doing anything beyond just condemning it?
Yes, they did. The minister called for an immediate ceasefire, demanded the release of all hostages, pushed for urgent humanitarian aid, and stressed the need for a political path forward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Israeli government's decision to approve plans for an expanded offensive, summarised by officials as the conquest of Gaza, is disgraceful. It will wreak more devastation and displacement on Palestinians after months of bombardment. It will also narrow the path back to a ceasefire, while severely harming the chances of getting the remaining hostages in Hamas's captivity back to Israel alive. Does the Minister agree with me that if the Israeli government carries out its threat to seize and hold Gaza, this would constitute a further flagrant breach of international law? And in that instance, can the Minister outline what this government's response would be? The latest aid blockade of Gaza has now reached over 60 days. The UN has described it as a growing humanitarian catastrophe. Prime Minister Netanyahu's latest proposals to deliver aid through private companies at military hubs would appear to contravene basic principles of international humanitarian law, including the neutrality of aid, and have been criticised by aid organisations as dangerous and unworkable. The Israeli government's refusal to reopen aid routes is utterly unacceptable and contravenes its obligations as an occupying power. We've welcomed the government's pledge of a £101 million package of support for the occupied Palestinian territories. Without more action to secure the reopening of aid pathways, however, this new package will provide limited relief for Palestinians suffering in the Strip. Can the Minister provide details on how the government is working with international partners to pressure the Israeli government to allow the aid to reach Gaza? And can the Minister also update the House on whether contingency measures are being considered to ensure aid reaches those suffering in Gaza, even if Israeli government continues to block the direct supply of aid into the Strip?
Right.
He did acknowledge Hamas's role, holding hostages and maybe diverting aid. But his main point was that expanding the military offensive isn't the way to get hostages back or defeat Hamas.
So the emphasis is still very much on diplomacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The government doubled down on the idea that a two-state solution is really the only path to lasting peace and security for everyone involved. And they also expressed serious reservations about using private companies for aid delivery, questioning if that approach even aligns with humanitarian principles or if it could possibly handle the sheer scale of the need on the ground. They demanded clarity from Israel on how they intend to manage aid.
And what about the Palestinian state question?
They reaffirmed the UK's commitment to recognizing a Palestinian state, made that point quite clearly.
Okay, so that's the government's official stance, laid out by the minister.
Yeah.
Now let's pivot to the wider parliament. What were the members of parliament, the MPs, saying in response? I'm guessing the mood was quite intense.
Oh, absolutely. You could really feel the anger and frustration coming through in the transcript. A major theme, repeated quite a lot, was the sense that previous UK condemnations just haven't worked. MPs were pointing out that Israel seems to have basically ignored the government's stated positions before.
It must be incredibly frustrating for them, like shouting into the wind.
Exactly. That feeling of impotence seemed quite strong. And of course, the humanitarian catastrophe was front and center.
Understandably.
MPs talked about the horrifying death toll, over 52,000, mentioned the fact that aid had been blocked for 2 months, the World Food Program saying food supplies are gone. Just a dire picture.
And the legality of it all. International law.
Huge concern. Serious questions were raised about whether seizing and holding Gaza and even the proposed aid delivery methods might breach international law. This idea of rules governing how countries behave seemed like a really sore point.
Yeah, keeps coming up, doesn't it?
It does. Lots of MPs talked about what they see as Israel acting with impunity when it comes to international law, and they called for that to end.
So what do they want the government to do about it?
Well, that led to repeated calls for the UK government to seriously consider sanctions. Sanctions against Israel itself, maybe against specific Israeli ministers, or targeting goods from the settlements.
Sanctions, okay, that's a big step. Was there talk about weapons, too?
Definitely. Very forceful demands to stop all arms supplies and military cooperation.